Okay, so thank you everybody. Thank you for attending today's webinar. This is Introduction to Power BI Desktop, and my name's Dustin Ryan, so we're going to be walking through an introduction to the Power BI Desktop tool. First off, I'd like to say thanks to Pragmatic Works for hosting this event and for inviting me to come along. I always have a good time presenting these webinars and getting to chat with our audience and talk to my friends at Pragmatic Works. So thank you, Liz, for setting this up, and thanks, Pragmatic Works. On the screen, you'll see my contact information there, and I'll put it up at the end of the screen, or at the end of the webinar as well. You can email me there at dustin.ryan@microsoft.com, and there's my Twitter handle, @SQLDusty, so feel free to follow me on Twitter, send me a tweet. If you haven't heard me speak before or followed me online before, my name's Dustin Ryan. I'm a data platform solution architect at Microsoft. I work on the education STU, that's the education team, and all of my customers are K-12 and higher ed institutions, and basically help them figure out how to leverage Microsoft products to answer their challenges with data. And I happen to spend a whole lot of time working with Power BI and helping our customers how to figure out how to use Power BI. I'm an author and a blogger and speaker. There's a couple of books that I've worked on as an author and contributor. So today is all about Power BI Desktop. But for us to kind of understand, where Power BI Desktop fits in this whole thing, we kind of have to start at the beginning. So we're going to talk about what is Power BI. And so if you're not familiar with that, we're going to give you a brief overview of what is Power BI and how Power BI Desktop fits there. Then we'll talk about getting started with the tool, and then we're going to walk through the majority of this presentation is going to be demo. So we're going to walk through how do we get our data, how do we consume the data, how do we connect to our data sources. Is there any cleansing necessary for the data? How do we get all connected up and transform the data as necessary? We'll talk about building our semantic model, and then we'll talk about visualizing the data. And that's the fun part, is building the charts and the visuals. So if you're not familiar with Power BI, and hopefully everybody here has at least heard of it, or maybe even read about it if you haven't played with it at all. Power BI is Microsoft's brand new cloud-based analytics and reporting tool. And so the tool was in preview for the first half of last year, and then it went GA in June, July timeframe. And so it's Microsoft's brand new reporting tool, and it's a big deal because it's very easy to connect to your data wherever your data exists. So whether you've got data in a SQL Server, Oracle, or Excel files, or CSV files, doesn't really matter. Power BI can connect to all of that data. And one of the reasons we ran the poll that we did, asking which technologies you're familiar with, discussing Excel, Power Query, Power View, Power Pivot, is because Power BI is based on those technologies. So if you've used Power Pivot before, you're going to be able to understand Power BI very easily. If you've used Power View before, if you've built reports using Power View in SharePoint or in Excel, you're going to understand a lot about Power BI. If you've used Power Query, you're going to understand a lot about Power BI. And so if you have experiences with those technologies, that's going to make your life a whole lot easier. And what I tell people is that if Power Pivot, Power Query, and Power View had a baby, it would be Power BI. And so Power BI lets you connect to your data wherever it exists, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. Power BI also gives us a lot of the modeling capabilities that you're familiar with in Power Pivot. So, the ability to establish relationships, build calculations, those types of things we can all do in Power BI. And we can also, of course, create our visuals, right? That's really the important part here, is being able to visualize the data. Of course, building the model correctly is important, and cleansing the data is important, but really most of the value here is going to be how do we visualize the data. And then Power BI also gives us a way to share our data and our reports. And so in the case of this being a cloud-based analytics and reporting tool, we can share our data and our reports through the Power BI service, which runs in Azure. Okay, so that's basically what Power BI is. Now, let's talk about what is Power BI Desktop, because those are two separate things. They work together, and they're all part of the Power BI ecosystem. But when we say Power BI versus Power BI Desktop, we could be talking about two separate things. So Power BI Desktop is the main report authoring tool that you'll most often use when creating your Power BI content. And the Power BI Desktop tool is a little application that you can download for free, whether you're a Microsoft customer or not. Anybody can download it, and it's the main report authoring tool. So that's the tool that we can use to get data from the variety of data sources that we might have. And using Power BI Desktop, we can either import the data into our model or we can directly query it. And so if you're familiar with SQL Server Analysis Services, you can set up a direct query for a data source so that none of the data is stored in the model. Rather, whenever you query the model, the model sends the query down to the underlying data source. And so you're not actually storing any of the data in the model. It's always directly querying the underlying data source. And that's only supported for certain types of data sources like SQL Server, Oracle, not supported for things like Excel or CSV files. Power BI Desktop also allows us to cleanse and transform our data via Power Query. And so the really nice thing about Power Query, if you haven't ever used it before, is that it's really easy to use and it's really easy to set up rules and guidelines for transformations that you want to apply to your data. So even if you don't know how to write any code, or you're not a coder or a developer or something like that, you can still do a lot of different things with your data using Power Query. So if you need to exclude values from the data set, or if you need to transform values into another data set, or you want to pivot or unpivot or do all these different things, very easy to do in Power Query, and you can do all of it without having to write any code. So it's really nice for the type of user that maybe isn't very technically sound with coding and developing. And Power BI Desktop also lets us create what we call our semantic model. And you can think of the semantic model as basically this layer of abstraction that sits on top of our data sources. And so the semantic model is where we can specify relationships between tables, whether those tables come from different data sources, completely up to you. So we might have some data coming from an Excel file, we might have some data coming from a CSV file, maybe we've got some data coming from a web page, maybe we've got some data coming from a relational database. The semantic model is where we can create relationships between all of those different disconnected data sources. And then in the model, of course, we can build in our calculations, we can build in our measures, hierarchies, we can add our security setup, which is a new feature of Power BI Desktop, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And once we've built our semantic model and got everything set up nice and neat, we're ready to start actually creating the reports, which is where we'll build our charts and our graphs and the different ways that our users would maybe like to visualize the data. Now when we're talking about Power BI Desktop, you probably will spend most of your time in the cleansing, transforming, and semantic model and the model development side before you get to the chart visualization, because that's really going to be the most important step. Making sure that the data is nice and clean and formatted before you start trying to visualize it. And a lot of times if you just jump right into the visualization piece of it, you're probably going to have to go back and do a little bit of work, cleansing the data as you identify problems with the data. So when we're talking about Power BI and Power BI Desktop, we're talking about a couple different things. Power BI is the analytics and reporting tool, cloud-based analytics and reporting tool rather. Power BI Desktop is the authoring tool that fits sort of within the Power BI ecosystem. So when we're thinking about this from a workflow perspective, you'll notice over here on the left that we have our Power BI Desktop tool. And that's where we build our model, we build our charts, and build our visuals. Now all of this is taking place on our local machine. So I've got my laptop set up here, I've got Power BI Desktop installed, and from my laptop I can connect to the data sources, I can build my model, build my charts. And when I'm done with that, I've got this great model, I've got all this data put together, I've done this really awesome mashup and added some fantastic charts on top of it, but nobody else can see that because it just lives on my desktop. Well, the next step then is to publish to the Power BI service. And the Power BI service is where we can do things like collaborate with other users, set up team workspaces, and even in the service we can do some other things like connect to data sources and bring in new data sources, but it's not as flexible as a Power BI Desktop tool. Power BI Desktop tool gives you the full range of modeling and data source connections and capabilities that you have with Power BI. Power BI service, you can connect to data sources, you can build new charts, but not quite as flexible here as it is with the desktop tool. And so I do, I'll say I do 99% of my brand new Power BI content creation in the desktop tool. And when I'm done there, I publish it to the Power BI service. Once I've got it published to the Power BI service, like I said, I can share, I can build new reports based on the data set I've created, the model I've created, and then from there, users can view it in their browser, in any of the mobile apps, whether they're on iOS, Android, Windows Phone devices, doesn't really matter. But once we get it published to the Power BI service, then we can view it wherever we want to view it at. Another piece that is brand new with SQL Server 2016 is we can also now publish Power BI Desktop to SQL Server Reporting Services 2016. And so if for your organization publishing data to Azure is not an option for whatever reason, another potential option here would be to stand up an instance of SQL Server Reporting Services 2016 and then publish our Power BI content, our Power BI Desktop files to the Reporting Services server. And then with reporting services, we can leverage the security infrastructure of reporting services to wrap security around these Power BI Desktop files. And the way that this works is that when you publish Power BI Desktop to Reporting Services 2016, it's uploaded as a file. And then your users that have permission to access the folder that holds those files can then download the Power BI Desktop file and then browse it using the Power BI Desktop tool. So when you create a Power BI Desktop file, it's a PBIX extension. You upload the PBIX file to SQL Server Reporting Services, then those users that have access to that folder can then download that file and open it up in Power BI Desktop and then browse it and view it. And so that's sort of the way that the on-prem story is right now. Going forward, Microsoft has been very public about saying that the feature parity between the service and the on-prem story, not quite there yet. You have the dynamic range of features with the Power BI service as far as things like collaboration, row-level security, building row-level security into Power BI. You have and the team workspaces, so you have all of that in the Power BI service. In Reporting Services 2016, you don't quite have that, and so just something to be aware of there. So that's where Power BI Desktop kind of fits into this whole story. Whether you're going with Power BI Service, running in Azure, or you're publishing your Power BI Desktop files to reporting services, the Power BI Desktop tool is going to be your main report authoring tool. And so that's what really the purpose of this webinar here is to get you started with Power BI Desktop, give you an overview of the different capabilities of the tool, get you introduced to consuming data, transforming data, cleansing the data, and then building your visualizations. And then along the way, we'll also talk about some of the new features that have been released just within the last month in Power BI. So that means it's time for the demo. So I'll stop showing you the boring PowerPoint slides, and we'll move on to the fun part of actually building stuff. Okay, so first things first, if you want to get started with Power BI, you need to download the desktop tool. And as I said earlier, the Power BI desktop tool, completely free to download, whether you're a Microsoft customer or not, whether you have Power BI service running or not, doesn't really matter. You can download the desktop tool for free. So if you just go to powerbi.com, you go to products up at the top, there's the Power BI desktop option there. You click on that, and that brings you here to the download page. And so you can just click the download button. That will download the 64-bit version of Power BI. If you're running on a 32-bit machine, you can go to the advanced download options and download it from the advanced screen, and then you have to select the 32-bit version there. So you click download here, and it'll give you a little option. Get the 32-bit one if you need to do that. Okay, but once you've gotten that downloaded, everything that I'm about to do, you're going to be able to do. And so I'm not using any of the paid features here in this demonstration. This is all just the free Power BI desktop tool. So I've got it pinned here to my taskbar, so I'm just going to open Power BI desktop and we'll get started. All right, this is opening up on my other screen here. So just give it a moment and then I'll move it over. right, here it goes. Okay. Now I know some of you said that you have some experience with Power Pivot. And one of the really cool things about Power BI Desktop Tool is if you've got this really great Power Pivot model that you'd like to convert into Power BI, you can do that very easily from here. So if I go up here to File, come on now, it's not responding for me. Here we go. Just bear with me here for a moment. Well, there we go. Just took a moment for it to get its mess together. There we go. So if you go to File up at the top, you've got this option here for Import. And you go to Import, and you can see that one of the options here is Excel Workbook Contents. So if I click this here, and if you've got a Power Pivot model and maybe some Power View report that you want to convert into Power BI into a Power BI model, you can use this import wizard here to create that. So I've got one here that I've created. So let me go here to, got a Power Pivot report or a Power Pivot model here in this Excel workbook, and then I've also got a Power View report. And so I'm going to select this here, and I'm going to click Open. And it's going to tell you, say, hey, we can import this Excel workbook content and convert it into a brand new Power BI file. And so click Start here. So just take a moment. It's going to import the Power Pivot model, import any Power View, any reports in there. And so if you've got things in there, calculations, different things like that, it's going to import that and create brand new Power BI content for me. And so now that it's finished, you'll see that it'll give me a little summary here of the migration. You can see that there were a few queries that were brought in. You can see the data model tables. You can see it brought in a couple of measures here, and then it also picked up the Power View sheet in here. And so now it's all added this here to my Power BI file, and I've got a brand new Power BI file. And so if I click over here, you can see here's the Power BI report, and this is based on the Power View report that existed in Excel. So if you've got a great Power Pivot model that has tables and relationships, Power BI can import all of that as you see here. So that part is pretty cool. So for those of you that have experience with Power Pivot, maybe you've got some great Power Pivot stuff out there, getting started with Power BI is going to be really easy because you can just import that content into Power BI and create a brand new Power BI desktop file. So that part is pretty cool. So I just wanted to show you that piece. But for the rest of us who maybe don't have experience with Power Pivot and haven't had time to build anything in Power Pivot or get familiar with the technology, we can still start from scratch and build our Power BI content from scratch. And so I'm going to close this up here. All right, I'm going to open up a brand new blank instance of Power BI Desktop here. Okay. All right. So the very first thing that you'll want to do, and chances are if you're opening yours for the very first time, what you're going to see when you're opening Power BI Desktop for the very first time, this is probably what you're going to see here. You're going to see this kind of little welcome screen here, the getting started screen. You've got some nice videos here that are good if you're brand new to Power BI. You've got links to the forums, the Power BI blog where they announce new features and new updates, and then you've also got a link to the tutorials, which I highly recommend. So if you're new to Power BI, definitely look at the tutorials because that's where you're going to find answers to your questions about like how do I create measures, how do I set up tables and relationships and charts and all those different types of things. So when you open it up for the very first time, this is probably what you're going to see. So first step here is we need to actually connect to some data wherever our data exists. So I'm going to click the little Get Data button here. If you have this window closed, you can also just go up to the top in the Home ribbon, and there's a Get Data button up here that we can click on, and that'll take us to the same place. So I'm going to click the Get Data button here. And what you're going to see here is a list of all the different data sources that Power BI supports. And you can see it's quite an extensive list. And they're adding new items to this list all the time. So whether you've got data in a CSV file, XML, JSON, data in a SharePoint folder, SharePoint list, you got Oracle, SQL Server course, Access, SSAS, Teradata, you've got Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Azure SQL Database, websites, HDFS, Active Directory, Facebook, Google Analytics. So quite an extensive list of different data sources here. Now, of course, in this case, I've got some data in a SQL Server database, so I'm going to select SQL Server database here and click Connect. All right, and then you just type in the name of your server. It's just running on my local machine. Now, because I'm connecting to SQL Server, you'll see here that I've got a couple of options here. I've got import or I've got direct query. And we kind of touched on the differences between these here, but import means that whichever tables I select from the SQL Server database are going to be imported into Power BI and become part of the semantic model. Now, the semantic model is basically an in-memory database that takes the data from the SQL Server tables we specify, highly compresses it into the Power BI semantic model. And that gives us some advantages. It's going to be very, very fast because it's an in-memory compressed model, and we have some flexibility about how we work with the data. So we can apply transformations to the data. We can build extensive list of different types of calculations. If I select direct query, that means that I'm going to leave the data in the SQL Server database, and that anytime I click a chart or apply a filter, Power BI is going to generate a T-SQL query that gets sent down to the SQL Server database. Then the results get sent back. And so that's if I'm using direct query. So if you've got 10 terabyte data warehouse, probably not going to do import. You're probably just going to use direct query. And so in that case, your performance optimizations, your calculations, and everything, a lot of that will be done in the database itself, and you're just going to bring that over. You're going to consume that in Power BI. Now in this particular case, I'm going to do an import. And by doing import, we're going to create that in-memory semantic model. We can apply calculations to it. We can mash it up with other data sources and do a lot of different things like that. So I'm going to click import here and click OK. All right, and so for this example here, I'm going to use the new Microsoft example databases. If you didn't see that, there's a new example database that they've released in place of AdventureWorks, and it's called Wide World Importers. And so you can see the list of the tables here and broken down by the different schemas. And so I've got a few different tables I want to select. I'm going to select fact sale here. And when I select that, you'll see I get a little preview of the data, and I can click the little button down here to select the related tables, and it'll look at the foreign key relationships and figure out which tables are related. And so we can see here we've got stock item, employee, date, customer, and city. Okay, now this is just going to give us a preview of the data. This is not all of the data. You can see we get this little message here that says, hey, the data has been truncated due to size limits, so it's just showing us just a little bit of the preview. Now, if we're bringing data in from a very clean data source, we could click load here, and that'll actually just load all of the data up into the model from all of these tables here, and that's fine. If we have data that we know we're going to have to apply some transformations to, then we can click the edit button here, and this will open up the Power Query query editor window. So if you're familiar with Power Query and Excel, you're going to be very familiar with the query editor. It's opening up on my other screen, so let me bring this over here. Okay, so if you're familiar with Power Query, this is all going to look really super familiar to you. Now, I'll just point out a couple of things here. Over here on the left, you'll see the queries, and you can see we have one query per table, and I can edit each of these queries for these tables. So if I need to apply transformations to maybe my fact query here, maybe my fact table has, I'm just going to make up something here, 20 years worth of data in it. And for the purposes of reporting, I only really need 3 years worth of data. Well, then I could come in here and I could filter this down and apply that transformation here. So over here in the middle, obviously we have a preview of the data. Up at the top, you see the column names, and you also see these little icons here. These actually are showing us the data type. So if it says 1, 2, 3, that means that this is a whole number data type. If you see this here, it looks like a little calendar icon that indicates that this is a date time data type. If you've got the ABC, that means that it's a text data type. And then if you see something that says like 1.2, that means it's a decimal data type, like this. That means it's a decimal data type. And so you can kind of see the data types there. And so if you need to change a data type, if I wanted to change this from decimal to whole number, I could just click that icon there, and then you've got the different data types here. You can apply that data type change if you need to do that. Okay. Now we have the ability here to apply transformations to this data. So if I need to delete columns, if I need to create a custom column, if I need to exclude rows, maybe split a column by a delimiter or pivot or unpivot the data, I can do all of that from here without writing any code. And basically what it boils down to is you select the column that you're interested in transforming, and then you can either right-click on the column. You can see some of the transformations here. So like if I wanted to remove errors from this column, maybe I had some values in here that weren't date, time, data type, and so I want to remove those. I can exclude these rows based on the rows that have errors here in this column. I can do things like replace values. So if there's a funny character in here I need to get rid of, I can use replace values for that. You can do group bys and pivots and unpivots and rename columns and do all those types of things here. And so that's one way you can apply transformations to the data. You also have the home ribbon up here up at the top that will allow you to apply transformations as well. So from up here at the top, if you are bringing in maybe a text file and the first row in the text file has the column headers, you can use this transformation here, use first row as headers, and it will automatically promote that first row to the header. And so, and you can just click that button there and it'll do that transformation for you. You also have the transform ribbon here. You can continue to apply other types of transformations here. So if you've got, if you want to extract a value, if you want to merge a couple columns together, if you need to, maybe apply some arithmetic to something, if you want to multiply some numbers together or divide numbers, do something like that, you can do that here. You've also have some date-time transformations here. So if I wanted to, do something like, show this as the year, something like that, you can do that. So you got a whole lot of different transformations here. Now, in this particular case, I want to show you something as far as transforming this date-time data type. So very similar to Excel, if I want to filter this, I can just click the little drop-down arrow here, and I can go to my date filters here, and I'm going to select after here. So I want to make sure I get all of the rows that occur after the year 2013. So I'm going to click after, and I'm going to say I want to get all of the rows where the invoice date key is after 12/31/2013. So that way everything is going to be all of my 2014 data and forward. So I'm going to type that in there, click OK. You'll see here that it actually went ahead and applied that transformation to my data. So I don't know if you caught that, but you can see here that now I've got only 2014 data here. All the 2013 values went away. Another thing that I want to point out here is over here on the right, you'll notice here that I have this list of applied steps. And these are actually the steps, the transformations that I'm applying to the data. Now it's important to point out here that we're not actually modifying the underlying data. I'm not doing anything in the wide world imports database. What I'm doing here is every time I'm applying a transformation here, I'm creating a set of rules and transformations to apply to this data each time I import it into Power BI. So whenever I refresh my Power BI content, it's going to take this set of steps here and apply that to the data. So you can think of this as a framework of rules of transformations to apply to the data. So if I do something like, delete my delivery date key. So maybe I don't need this delivery date key. So I right-click on the column, select remove, and that's going to remove the column. And you can see it added another applied step here. So the first step was created when we specified the source of SQL Server database. Then the navigation was selecting the table. Then the filtered rows, that was our step where we filtered all the data out 2013 and prior. And then remove column, that was when we just deleted that date column. If you want to go back a step, you can just click the little X button and that will undo that step for you. And you can see now that we've got the delivery date key back. But I'll go ahead and remove it because we don't actually need it. If you also want to look at the configuration of a step, you can click the little cog button here and that will allow you to alter that step. So if I say, whoops, I made a boo-boo, I really want to get 2015 data and forward, I can come in here and I can alter this if I need to. If you want to, and you can see I kind of highlight these steps and I can kind of navigate backwards through my applied steps to kind of look at, what did that transformation actually do? What did the data look like before the transformation? So on and so forth. Okay, so I've got my applied steps over here. Now we can rename our query, and this is going to affect the name of the table once the query brings the data into our Power BI semantic model. So instead of calling this fact sale, I'm just going to call it sale. And what I would do is I would go through here each of the queries. Oops, I forgot to enter on that, and rename these to get rid of the fact and the dimension nomenclature. One of the important things here to remember is that everything that we do here is going to affect the end user experience. And so if we can do things like use really good naming conventions, give our columns really user-friendly names instead of using abbreviations when possible, remove things like dimension and fact, because that may not make sense to the users. And so if we can do things like that, by anything that we can do to make the lives of our users a little easier by using good naming conventions, formatting values, different things like that, we want to take the time to do that because that's going to affect the user experience. And so come through here and rename all of these queries so that way everything will look nice and neat to the users. Now, you can see here that I've applied all of these transformations to this table here, this query here. And what's really happening here as we're applying transformations to it is actually building what's kind of informally known as our M query to query that data source. And if you want to see the actual underlying query that's being passed through to SQL Server, you can, or you want to see the M query that has all these steps in it, you can go to the Home ribbon and you go to the Advanced Editor button up here at the top. And this is the actual M query that's being used to query our SQL Server database. And so you can see the steps here. There's the source, there's the server, there's where we get the database, specify the database, this is where we get the table, there's the filtered row step, there's the removed column step, and that's sort of the M query there. And so you have the ability to come in here and open this up, and you can modify all of this here. If you're an M query guru and you want to get in here and do this, you certainly have the ability to do that. Most of the time, you probably won't have to do that. Now, one other thing I also want to point out here is that we have this feature built into Power Query called what's called query folding. And basically what that means is that a transformation that we're applying here in Power Query will actually get passed to the native T-SQL query that's getting sent to SQL Server. And so remember here in this filter step, we filtered out all of the rows where the invoice date was 2013 and prior. Now if you want to see if query folding is taking place, if this filter is actually being sent down to the SQL Server database, I can right click on this step and you can see that there's a button here that says View Native Query. And when I open this up, you can see here that that step actually added a where clause to our underlying T-SQL query, and that is a good thing because what that means is that we can reduce the load on the SQL Server database by filtering out the rows that we don't need. And so with query folding in mind, you want to consider how you apply transformations to your data. So if I know that I need only data after 2013, I wouldn't go in here and apply tons of transformations to these columns and then as the last step filter the rows, because then I'm having to apply transformations to a bunch of the data. And so you want to filter the rows as soon as possible, remove the columns that you don't need, because if you remember when we're building our semantic model, what we're really building is an in-memory database. So we want to keep our semantic model as small and as pared down as possible by eliminating columns, eliminating rows whenever possible. Okay, so once you've finished applying your changes and you're happy with your queries and everything, you can click the little close and apply button up here at the top, and that will query the underlying databases. You'll see our little window pop up. It's creating connections to the tables. We're going to connect to SQL Server database, and it's going to query those tables and then import the data into the model here. So we'll just give this a moment here to finish. Okay. While we're waiting for this to finish up, this will probably just take a moment here. Liz, do we have any questions that have come up in the chat window?
Yeah. How do you save, export a visualization for display in another application?
So that's a good question. So if you want to display these visuals in another application, you can publish it to the Power BI service. And then there's a whole host of developer tools that allow you to interact with your Power BI content in the service. And so you can learn more about that if you go to dev.powerbi.com. You can find out all of the different developer tools that you have available. Just this week, Power BI Embedded went generally available. And so you can do things like build an application and embed Power BI visuals in your application. And so go to dev.powerbi.com to learn more about the dev capabilities there for embedding Power BI in your apps.
Okay. You ready for another one?
Sure, yeah, this is just going to take a second for it to get this data imported.
Sure. Is direct query supported for a SQL Azure Data Warehouse data source?
Yes, it is. It's a good question. Yep. So direct query is supported for a SQL Server. It's supported for analysis services. It's supported for Oracle, I believe Teradata, SAP HANA, Azure SQL DB, and Azure SQL DW. Okay, so good questions. All right, so we've got our data imported here, and so the first thing I want to point out here is there's three different views or three different design panes that you're going to use for developing your Power BI semantic model and your visualizations, and you can see those over here on the left. So the first view we have is our relationships view, and so you can see that little icon here on the bottom. Click that to flip over here to the relationships view. There we go. Just taking a moment here to, okay, and so we can see our the relationships here in our model. Now you've probably noticed that I didn't actually create these relationships. Power BI did that for me, and it's based on the relationships in the data source, data types of the columns, the column names, and so when possible, Power BI will create the relationships for you. But it's always a good idea to kind of go back and take a look at the relationships and make sure that everything is correct. Now there's a couple different ways you can look at the relationships. You can just kind of hover over one and you can double click on it, and that will open up the relationship editor, and you can kind of see how this relationship is configured. So I clicked on the little line here between the sale table and the stock item table. If we can see here that the relationship here is based on the stock item key in the sale table and the stock item key in the stock item table. So that is a correct relationship. And you can see here that it automatically detected the cardinality for me correctly. Now the cross filter direction here, this basically determines the direction that a filter can be used from one table to another. And so in a single directional filter, that means that when I select a filter from stock item, I can filter the sale table. But because this is only a single directional filter, if I select a filter from the sale table, that filter won't affect the stock item table. And you can change this too. So if I wanted to make this a bidirectional filter or both directional, that means that I can filter both directions if that's a particular requirement. Okay, and I'll leave this as single here and click cancel. The other way that you can edit the relationships between the tables in your model is click the little Manage Relationships button up here at the top. And that will show you all of the relationships that exist in your model. Now we can see here that we've got our relationships up here at the top. We have an inactive relationship here, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. And you can edit these from here. So if you select a relationship, you can click the Edit button, and that will open up the relationship editor for you. Now, you'll notice here that between sale table and the customer table, we have a solid line, we have a dotted line. And that's because between two tables, you can only have one active relationship. So a lot of times in SQL Server or relational databases, you maybe have this concept of role-playing dimensions or role-playing tables where maybe you've got something like a build to customer and the sold to customer could be very different people. And so you've maybe got a build to customer key and you've got the customer key. Well, because you can only have one active relationship, one of those relationships is going to be determined to be active. And in this particular case, we can see that the active relationship here is based on the build to customer. If I need to change that up, I can deactivate this relationship here and activate the other relationship here, so that way the sold to customer is going to be the active relationship. And I click close, and you'll see here that this will change. And so now the customer key is the active relationship here. All right. So let's keep moving on. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to go to the next view here. I'm going to go to the data view. And this is where you can see a preview of the data in your tables. Now over here on the right, you can see those different tables. We've got our city table, customer, employee, invoice date, sale, stock item. And remember, these are all individual queries that we have that we first established when we connect to our SQL Server database. If I need to go back and edit those queries at any time, maybe I come in here and I'm looking at my data and I say, oh man, some of this is messy, I don't like the way it looks, and I need to actually do some more data cleansing, I can click the little Edit Queries button up here at the top, and that will bring me back to my query editor, and so I can continue to apply some transformations to the data here. And then once I've finished, I can just click the Close and Apply button, and that will take me back to the Power BI desktop tool. Okay, and so this is where you'll probably find yourself doing most of your calculation creation when you need to do things like create calculated columns, create calculated measures, maybe create new columns for, if you want to concatenate columns together, or if you want to do something like that. Probably going to use this view most of the time. And to do those types of things, you can go over to the Modeling tab, and you can see we can create new measures here, we can create new columns, and we can also create new tables. We can actually create calculated tables. And a very common example of that would be if we don't have a date dimension, which in this case we do, but if we didn't, I could create a new table here, a new calendar table, right in Power BI without actually having to import one from Excel or from SQL Server or something like that. So we have the ability to do that. Okay, then we have our report view, and the report view is where we're going to do all of the really cool stuff, all of the creation of the visuals and the charts. Now, this white area here, this is your report design pane, and by default, when you first create your Power BI content, you have one page. You can add additional pages here just by clicking the little plus button. You can add as many pages as you need here. So you probably will use one page to visualize the data one way, then maybe you'll have a second page to maybe visualize the same data but just in a little different way. So you can create multiple pages to visualize the same data. Over here on the right, this is where you're going to see the list of tables that you have in your model, and you'll also see the fields within those tables. So you can click the little arrow next to a table, and that will show you the fields that are visible in the table, and we can browse through that. Over here on the left, under the Visualizations tab, this is where you can add the different reports. So of course you've got all of the classics here. You've got stacked bar charts and column charts and line charts and combo charts, and you've got scatter plots and pie charts and tree maps and tables and matrices and different types of maps. And so you've got all of the traditional report types that you're probably very familiar with. Here, the values tab, the values area here, this is where you're going to add the different fields to the different regions of the report. And so if I do something like, let's bring in a stacked column chart here. So I'm just going to click the stacked column chart button here, and you can see here it adds an empty chart, and you can see the different regions or areas of the chart that we can add data to. So we've got a region for the axis, one for the legend, the value, the color saturation, and any tooltips we want to put in the chart here. And so it's just a matter of dragging those fields over or just clicking the little checkbox next to it. We also have a filters window down here at the bottom that we can use to apply filters to the report. So if I want to only filter this particular chart, I can add data fields here to it and apply visual level filters. If I want to filter all of the visuals on page 1, I can apply filters here just by dragging over the field and then adding the filters in. Or if I want to apply filters to the entire report that will effectively filter the data for every single page in this report, I can add the filters here down to the report level filters. Now, creating the visuals in Power BI, super easy. The only thing that's required of you to be able to create the visuals is to know which type of chart you want to use and which field in the table do you want to use. So in this particular case, I'm going to come down here to my sale table, and I'm going to add this package field here, and I want to add this as the let's put this as the axis here. Okay, so I haven't put a value in here yet, so that's why it's still blank. Now I've got a profit number here that I want to add as the value. So we want to measure our profit by the package type, and so I'm going to take profit and I'm going to drop this here on the value. All right, and you see here that I've got my package types down here at the bottom. On the axis, I'm displaying the profit as the value to measure. And then the last thing here I want to do is go to my stock item table here, and I'm going to add the lead time days to my legend. Okay, and you can resize this visual. You can just click the little handle up at the top to kind of move this around if you want to. You can click the little handle on the left and you can resize it and make it bigger or smaller, do whatever you want to do there. And so I'm just going to click this over here, kind of resize it a little bit. And so we have our lead time days as the legend, and we got the visual, we got the package type here and the values in the visual. Now we can apply some formatting here to this chart. The formatting options will be accessed through the little paintbrush button here. So if I click the paintbrush here, that will take me over to the formatting options. And so to get to the formatting options, just make sure you have the chart selected that you want to format, then click the paintbrush, and then you can format the thing. So if you want to move the legend over, maybe you want to put the legend at the bottom, you want to put it over on the right, you can do that. If I want to turn on my data labels, I can do that here. You see you've got the data labels here. Let's make this a little bit bigger so the data labels will fit a little bit better. Okay, and we can also do things like customize the colors. So if you go to the data colors, maybe I want my items that have a lead time of 2 days. Maybe we want to show those as purple. I can click the purple button, and that will effectively change that to purple. And I want my items that are 3 days lead time. I want those to be light blue. I can do that, and maybe the 20-day lead time to be green. I can do that. So you have the ability to customize the colors for the individual data members. So that's really nice. I also want to point out here this this profit number that we brought over. You can see here it's got the little sigma icon next to it, and I hope you can see that. I hope it's not too small on your screen. But this little sigma icon here indicates that this is an implicit measure. And what that means is that Power BI has detected that this is a numeric field. And so we want to implicitly aggregate that. And so Power BI is just kind of guessing there on its part, saying, hey, this profit field here, it's a number, maybe you want to aggregate it. And so if I go back over here to the value of profit, and I click the little downward arrow here, you can see here how it's being aggregated. So in this case, it's summing the profit. And that's correct. You know, we want to sum the profit number up in this particular case. But if I wanted to do something like, you know, maybe average it, I could change the method of aggregation to average to get the average profit by package and lead time days, or the min, or the max, something like that. So you have the ability to change the method of aggregation for those implicit measures. And that's called an implicit measure there. Now, the default here was the sum, and we can actually control the default summarization for this number. So if I click on the little profit field here, and up here in the home, in the modeling ribbon rather, the default summarization is set to sum. And so I can change this to be something else, average. So that way when my users click on the implicit measure profit here, they don't have to come in here and change the value if maybe the default should be average. So they can make things a little easier for our users. Now sometimes you'll see a numeric field that should not be treated as an implicit measure. So in this particular case, the lineage key, that's just a key field on the sale table. And we don't want to aggregate that because that doesn't make sense. So you'll see here that because this is an implicit measure, if I just click this, let me click away from this. If I just click lineage key, it's going to add a new visual, and it's going to implicitly aggregate the lineage key. That's not what we want. And so I can actually turn off the aggregation for the lineage key by selecting the field, going to default summarization, and telling it, hey, don't summarize this because that's not going to make sense. And I'll remove this by clicking the little ellipsis button here and remove that. And so as a best practice, I would go and make sure that you know, these numeric fields that shouldn't be implicitly aggregated, I turn off the summarization for those. So that way our users don't accidentally run into any trouble by, you know, maybe actually implicitly aggregating some of this. So those are implicit measures. But we can also create what are called explicit measures. And explicit measures are where we create a calculation where we explicitly define the method of aggregation for the calculation. So for this, I'm going to go back over to the data view, and I'm going to go to my sale table. And I want to create a calculation for, let me scroll over here to the right a little bit. I want to create a calculation for my profit. Okay, so I'm going to click the new measure button here. And that's going to open up the query editor up here at the top. Now, if you're familiar with Power Pivot, you're going to be very familiar with this. This uses what's called DAX, that's the Data Analysis Expression Language, and that's the query language we're going to use here to create these calculations, to create calculated measures, calculated columns, calculated tables. So in this particular case, I want to create a measure called total profit. And I'm going to hit the equal sign just like you do in Excel when you're building out a formula in Excel. And I want to sum, and you'll see the IntelliSense will pop up. And the IntelliSense with Power BI is very good, and so we'll do a pretty good job of giving you hints about, you know, what functions you can use, what it's expecting here. And so when I click open parentheses here, you'll see here, and it's really small here on my screen, but it's expecting a column name here. And so I want to sum my profit. And so the profit column, I can either come and just click on the column here, or I could type it out if I wanted to, and close parenthesis. And so I'm going to sum up the sale profit. And so this is called an explicit measure here because the formula we've built explicitly specifies the method of aggregation. In this case, it's going to be a sum. Now you can see the new calculation down here in the bottom, total profit there, and it's got the little calculator icon here indicating that this is a calculated measure here. Now if you want to change the formatting of this, we would probably want to do that so that it show up as a currency. So if I go over here to my report view and I click on my new total profit and hover over it, you'll see that the number isn't necessarily formatted very nicely. And so I'll select my total profit measure here, go to the modeling ribbon. You've got the formatting options here just like you do in Excel. Click the drop down arrow here and I'm going to tell it that I want to format this as English dollars. Okay, so we've applied the formatting here. So now when I hover over it, everything is nice and neat. So that looks good for our users. Now one of the really cool things with Power BI and the DAX language is that it's very flexible with the types of calculations you can create. So you can see here that I've got my total profit calculation, and if I click on this, it'll bring up the calculation up at the top. Let me select this here. There we go. Just took a second for it to come up. If I need to come in here and edit this, I can just select the column and you'll see the calculation here and you can edit it here. But you can do some really cool things like do really powerful time calculations. So if you need to do like year-to-date calculations or period over period growth, you can do all of that within DAX. So if I create like a new measure here, if I want to calculate last year's total profit, come in here and call this last year total profit. Have the equal sign here, and I'm going to use the calculate expression, and I want to calculate the total profit for the same period last year. And I'm going to use this formula here. And so the important thing here is, if you're not familiar with DAX, don't worry about that here. But the purpose of this here is to demonstrate the flexibility of the formulas, of the formula language. And so you can see here I'm using a calculate function to calculate the total profit for the same period last year based on the invoice date. And that's really all that I'm doing here. So hit enter here. I've got my last year total profit. And I'm going to format this also as a currency. Yep, and then I'm going to go back to my report view over here. And I'm going to bring in my last year total profit. Okay, so I've got my total profit, I've got my last year total profit, but I really should add some context here because right now I'm not slicing by a year or anything or any date time, so it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense at this point. But if I go to my invoice date dimension and let's bring in the calendar year and put the calendar year on the axis, you can see here that my total profit for 2014 was 24 million, 2015 26 million, but now I can compare it to the last year total profit. I can do those things side by side, which is nice. Now if I want to do some type of comparison between what is my growth between this year and last year, I can just come in here and click new measure. I can call this, we'll call this total profit growth, and I'll take my total profit minus the last year total profit, and now I've got a variance calculation here. And I can add this in here if I want to do that. Now I can see what is the variance. Now if you want to remove fields from it, you can just come over here to select the chart that you want to remove fields from, get rid of the last year total profit. Maybe I'm only interested in calculating the variance here. And so now I can see what my variance is. And of course need to actually format this so it looks nice and neat. And let's turn on our data label so we can actually quickly look at it and we can see what is our variance between the years. And so you can see how very easy it is to add in some really powerful calculations. Now a couple other things that I want to show you here. We also have the ability to import custom visuals. And so one of the really cool things that the Power BI team did was they open sourced their visual stack. And so you can actually build your own visuals if you're so inclined, or you can download some really great visuals from the Power BI visuals library. So if you go to powerbi.com/visuals, these are all the different visuals in the visuals library that you can download for free and use in Power BI Desktop and then publish to the Power BI service. So these are all free to download. So if you've got a really unique requirement to visualize your sales as fish swimming around in an aquarium, you can do that here. Just download it for free, and then once you've got it downloaded in Power BI Desktop, you can import those custom visuals by clicking the little ellipsis button here. So you can click that, import a custom visual. I've got those downloaded in my downloads folder here. Power BI visuals, and you can see all the different ones I've got downloaded. So I've got this really cool box and whisker chart here. Click open here. It'll say, hey, you imported this successfully. That's fantastic. Now I can add this new report or this new visual type here. And so if I want to bring this in here and make the total profit the values, and I want to group this by packages here, you can see here that it is not showing anything. That's not cool. Come on now. Let's do it by maybe by calendar year. There we go. So you can import the custom visuals very easily, which is really nice. And so if you know none of the native visual types are going to satisfy your reporting requirements, you can certainly build your own or go get some of the really cool ones from the Power BI Visuals library. One of the other things that they built into Power BI is the ability to leverage R statistical programming language within Power BI. So if you have an R script that you want to use as a data source, or you want to build R visuals right into Power BI, you can certainly do that. And so here I have an example of Power BI desktop file that includes some R visuals here. And this is a coplot that I built using R. If you click on it, you can see the script here, the R script to build that. And the really cool thing here is that as I apply filters and slicers to it, it'll actually filter the R visuals here on the screen too. So very, very cool. So if you have those in your, if you have other, team members that are in research that are doing a lot of things, like machine learning, regression algorithms, or forecasting, different things like that, chances are they're probably doing that with R, and you can build that right into Power BI. A couple other things I want to show you very quickly. We can also build hierarchies into Power BI. So a very common hierarchy to build is a calendar hierarchy. So maybe I've got a calendar year here. So I'm going to right-click on calendar year, create new hierarchy. And then I'm going to click on, let's see, calendar month number, and select add to calendar year hierarchy. And I'm going to click on day number, and I'm going to select add to calendar year hierarchy. And you can see here that I've created a calendar hierarchy. And I can rename the hierarchy if I want to. Just call it calendar hierarchy instead of calendar year hierarchy. And a level hierarchy. So what I'll do is I'll select the button next to the hierarchy, and that will add it as a new visual here. Let me resize this a little bit. And then add the total profit calculation to it. Oops, got to make sure you have the chart selected. And now I've built a hierarchy that has a drill down in this chart. So to invoke the drill down, just click the downward arrow up here at the top. Click on the year you want to drill down on. You can see here now we're looking at the month numbers, and then I can click down on the month number and drill down into the days. If I want to go up, just click the up button to kind of navigate back up through the levels. And so you can build in your user-defined hierarchies and leverage those in your charts, which is really nice. Brand new feature that I want to cover here as we wrap up is the Manage Roles button up here. They actually moved the row-level security feature into Power BI Desktop, so you can actually design your roles around your data model here. And then when you publish it to the Power BI service, you can add users to those roles. And so if I click the Manage Roles button here, I can create a brand new security role, and we'll call this Wingtip Toys. Okay, and I can go to Customer and apply a DAX filter here that will basically filter the data set based on the users that are a member of this role. So I click the little ellipsis here next to Customer and go to Add Filter. I can go to Buying Group and tell that we'll call this, say we want to filter this where the buying group is equal to Wingtip Toys. And so those users that are a member of this role will only see rows where the buying group is Wingtip Toys. And now I'll click Save. And so I've added a role. Now if I want to test the role, I can click the View As Roles button here and then go to Wingtip Toys and click OK. And you'll see that this is actually going to filter this chart here, these charts. And you see there it goes, it filtered the charts, and now we're only looking at data where the row is Wingtip Toys. And if you want to verify that, we can go to, that's in the customer table, go to Buying Group, and I'm just going to add this here. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Let me remove this here. Buying Group, drop that in here. And you see here that the only value that we're going to see here is wingtip toys because we're filtering this data set. Okay, so that brings us to the end. Obviously, the last step here is we need to actually publish this. So we've built our data model, we've transformed the data, we've added some calculations, we added some reports, some visualizations. Then I can click the publish button here, and that will actually publish it to my Power BI service. So then you have to click save. We'll just call this test here. It's going to save it. It's going to come up with a little dialog box here in a moment, and then we'll have the option of selecting where we want to publish it. Which workspace do you want to publish it to? So thank you everybody for coming. I hope you learned a little bit about how to use Power BI Desktop, how you can get started using Power BI Desktop. As far as the resources go, you can download Power BI Desktop from powerbi.microsoft.com/en-us-desktop There's the link for that. You just go to powerbi.com, click Products, click Power BI Desktop. You can follow my blog at sqldusty.com. Have lots of great resources there on Power BI, using Power BI Desktop, Power BI tips, calculations, all kinds of different things like that. And then you can follow me on Twitter. sqldusty is my Twitter handle, and if you tweet me, I'll respond. So it pops up on my phone. So if you have a question or something like that, or you want me to point you to a good resource, I can certainly do that. So thank you, Liz. Thank you for hosting. You did a great job. And I've got a hard stop. Got to go catch a flight. So if there's any questions, would you mind emailing those to me?
Yep.
And I'll put
I
them
will.
to my
I
blog.
know we've got a ton of questions, so I'll send those to Dustin, and we'll post them up on the blog afterwards. Thanks, Dustin. As always, the recording will be available online tomorrow, and you'll receive an email. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dustin. Have a safe flight.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Liz.